A liberating truth that was revealed to me after I healed from 16 years of porn addiction was that the only way to escape prison is to realize that you are in prison. Welcome back, brave explorers, traveling heroes, and powerful creators, to another episode. I am your host and guide, Zach Blakeney, and today we're going into episode 03 of the Healing Porn Addiction series, and I like to call this one Escaping Hell. Now, if you've been following along with 01 and 02, 01, I went through the entire process of what I experienced from the time where I was 14 to 30. 02, I talked a little bit about I say a little bit about, as best I can, as transparent as I can, from after my ex-wife essentially forced it out of me, my addiction out of me, to the point where she decided to file for a divorce. And now we're here, so I can start talking about, well, what happened after she left. So as a reminder as well, like, there was three things that really drove me motivationally to explore and seek to find out about myself. One, I talked about there was these two questions that I had during some really pivotal moments in my life, which is who's listening, right? I can hear voices inside of me, so who's the one that's listening, and who's watching? I could see my life as a movie. Like, I could see like these thoughts and images. Well, who's watching these thoughts and images? The other thing that drove me was to understand what happened to me physiologically, based off of science, what happened to me while I was in porn addiction, because I never felt like myself. Like, I felt like this addiction wasn't me. It was some other part of me throughout this process. And then the third thing is that I started to open myself back up to the possibility that God could exist. I had become atheist through my process, through my journey in my 20s. So, I was like, well, maybe there is a God. Maybe there is something beyond the suffering and the hell that I experienced while I was there. So, I would say in the beginning when I left, right, or actually after my ex-wife left, I was blaming her the entire time. Right. So the immediate response of her leaving me was me blaming her. How could you leave me? How could she give up on me? We had devoted our lives to each other. Now, remember, again, if you didn't listen to the last two episodes, I had lied about catfishing men and women on Craigslist, and done so before, asking her to marry me and everything else. So she had felt that our whole marriage was based off lies, and that's absolutely true. So I was still sitting here saying that, like, hey, you were my soulmate. Like, we were supposed to spend the rest of our lives together, through thick and thin, through the good and the bad, and you left me, right? So I was blaming her so much during this time. Well, about a month after her leaving, I was sitting down in meditation, and I had picked up meditation now for maybe about a year or so. And I was just in the middle of meditation, and a voice spoke to me. Again, one of those things that I'm listening to. And the voice said, what would happen if you took 100% responsibility for your life and your choices? And something shifted inside of me, like instantly. Right? It was like I could see all of the bullshit. I like to say that I had a new set of lens to look at life through, and that lens was responsibility. Because before, I was in victim. I was blaming, I was complaining, everything else was not my fault. The addiction was not my fault. It was the porn industry, it was my parents, it was my upbringing, it was society. And although there is a value in understanding how you have been influenced to believe the things that you believe about yourself, it is not the influence's fault that you chose to believe it. You are the one that chose to take on these beliefs. You are the one that chose to watch pornography. You are the one that chose to watch pornography so much that your body became addicted to the biochemicals of cortisol and norepinephrine and oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin. You are the one that made those choices. You are the cause. You are the creator. So, if anybody is curious, by the way, I do have a free meditation guide. I do teach transcendental meditation, this meditation that I have referred to a couple of times. And if you check out the description below, I'll have a link to the meditation guide. You're welcome to have it. I just want to give it away because I know how powerful meditation has had on me. So let's talk about this. As I dove into wanting to understand again on the physiological side, what had happened to me, I looked at a few different modalities that started to answer the question for me. So the first place I looked was the understanding of neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is essentially your brain's ability to change over time. And it's a beautiful thing because I think it was the early 90s where scientists or brain scientists, neuroscientists started to change their tune and say, well, actually, like the brain can change longer than 25. Prior to that, the belief was, right, and this is how like things can be right and wrong and things change over time, is the belief was that by the time you were 25, that your brain wasn't going to change anymore, that you couldn't learn anything, that this was going to be who you were going to be for the rest of your life, your personality was set in stone, and you could not change. Think about how terrible that is. Think about if you're my age, think about your parents. Your parents were raised with that belief. By the time you're 25, you're going to be who you're going to be, and you can't change it. Like, holy shit, that sucks. But what really happened is that they figured out that no, neuroplasticity exists, which means that your brain can change over time, and your brain changes with experiences. So you continue to learn right through your experiences. Now, if you think about neuroplasticity in this way, I'm going to use porn for example. So when you have an experience, and let's say the experience is watching porn, and from that experience of watching porn, there's a lot of things that happen. But on the mental plane, you watch porn and then you create a thought about the porn. The thought that you create about the porn, you can think about it as creating a new pathway, right? A new neurological pathway in which there's a connection of that experience to the thought that you have. Now, to use an analogy that you could grasp, think about a ski slopes on a mountain, right? If you think about a mountain and ski slopes, there's different slopes, right? So every time a skier goes down the slope, you visit that neural pathway, the experience of watching porn and the thought of watching porn. Now, there's also emotions with watching porn as well. I'm just staying on the thoughts at this point. And you go down that pathway, and as the skier goes down that pathway becomes more ingrained and more ingrained and more ingrained. And think about it as something like that you could almost fall into, right? That over time, what would be called your subconscious mind or your program or your body, whatever you want to use at this point, your subconscious mind takes that over, in which your thoughts just start falling into that valley the entire time. So that's a good way that you can think about what happens when at first you consciously make a connection. Sometime during your addiction, you watched porn, you had a thought about porn, and that was the first time you chose to watch porn and to create this neural pathway. As you did that repetitively over time, you no longer had to consciously think about that thought. That thought just was something that was a natural thing that you would think about over and over again. This is what happens when we start having intrusive thoughts and we feel like we don't control our thoughts. Well, you were the one that thought it up in the first place. There's no way that it would come into your mind without you thinking it up in the first place. So actually, I'm not going to say there's no way, but in this sense of you creating your reality, that's what happened. So you created that thought process and you only reinforced it by continuing to think about it over and over and over again. This is what creates what we could call is the subconscious program, the program of who you are. So that was interesting to me because, again, before neuroplasticity, they would say that once you made that groove, you can't change the groove. But neuroplasticity says, no, you can create a new groove. So to create a new groove, let's think about that analogy of the ski slope again. And let's say if you want to make a new trail, well, you would then cut down the trees of this trail, and then you would throw snow on this trail. And then after clearing it and making it smooth and putting enough snow on it, the skier would start going down that slope, right? Down that trail. And then when this trail wasn't being used, new trees and shrubbery and everything else is going to start growing over this trail. And now that pathway is not being followed anymore. That's what you can think about what happens when we change our thoughts. Now, think about that as well when it comes to the analogy of what happens. It's not that you've been going down this pathway the entire time, thinking about porn, wanting to watch porn, masturbating to porn, whatever it is, over and over and over again. But the first time you want to go down that new pathway, well, there's trees. There's things in your way, right? You got to clear these things. Well, to me, the things you have to clear is the attachment to the old thoughts. the thoughts that you're a porn addict, the thoughts that you can't change, the thoughts that no matter what you do, you can't not masturbate, the thoughts that all these different thoughts could be represented by the trees that are in this pathway. And then we're just like chopping down one tree at a time. We're going to chop down this tree. That thought that I can't change myself. Let's chop that down. That thought that I can't go a couple of days without masturbating to porn. Let's chop that down. That thought, right? So over time, you're chopping down these trees, moving the shrubbery, whatever you want to say. And then eventually that pathway is clear. And then now you can actually see, and I do want to say that I'm just using this as an analogy. This happens much faster. Like when I'm working with guys throughout this process, this happens much faster than chopping down thousands of trees to try and get to one spot. It happens almost instantaneously once you have the new perception. So you go then to the point where you can go down that pathway. Well, then now you have the choice. Now choice has been revealed to you, which is that there's two pathways. Here's the old pathway. You know what that pathway is. That pathway is, let's just use for an example, I can't not masturbate to pornography after a couple of days. That pathway is there. The new pathway is I can. New pathway is, oh no, I don't have to watch porn at all. And you're sitting at the top and you actually get to choose now. What pathway do I want to go down? Well, you go down the pathway that says that, no, I'm powerful enough that I'm not going to watch pornography. And then that's the first creation of that thought. Now you go down that pathway over and over and over and over again. You start reinforcing that. And as you go down that pathway over and over again, the trees start to grow in that old pathway. And then you start to let go of that thought. That is a great way for you to think about neuroplasticity and how this occurs. So that was an interesting thing for me to understand. The other thing that was interesting for me to understand was the biochemical reaction or response to your thoughts, right? So that thought that no matter what I do, I can't go a couple of days without masturbating to pornography has an emotional response to it. That emotional response is most likely stress, fear, grief, shame, guilt, these lower vibrational emotions. And these lower vibrational emotions elicit biochemicals like cortisol. So your body becomes addicted to the shame, which actually elicits a biochemical it's addicted to, which is the cortisol. Now, the cortisol, you would think that'd be weird that somebody's addicted to stress, except for just look out into our society. Most people are addicted to stress. They might not want to experience stress consciously, but they have experienced stress consciously enough that their subconscious program, their subconscious mind, now just creates, this is what you can have as a trigger, triggers to create the cortisol in triggers, which create stress based off how they feel about themselves. So think about that as step one, so to speak, in a sense of, actually, I don't want to call it step one. But that is one of the reasons why I'll get to it in a second. That's one of the reasons why we escape the present moment. We're escaping stress. We don't want to experience the stress, so we escape the stress. Now, to escape the stress, we don't want to experience stress, but we want to experience something that makes us feel good. Well, that is dopamine. So when you start to get onto a computer for watching porn, like I was talking about in my story, like it got to the point where I was getting an erection like before I was even opening up my laptop because of the anticipation. So anticipation is created through dopamine. So take this anticipation of wanting to watch porn and thinking about the porn images, your brain starts to create dopamine. Now, this dopamine is a feel-good chemical, and you're escaping the stress and the shame of the present moment, the anxiety of the present moment, to elicit this dopamine. Now you open up your computer and you have a porn scene in front of you, dopamine. Now something called escalation happens where you're opening up 10 tabs at a time. I was opening up 10 for sure. I'll just say multiple at this point. Multiple tabs at a time. Every tab I open up, more dopamine, more dopamine, more dopamine. Every different scene that I watch, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. So this is what I was talking about, dopamine escalation, when I was watching gay porn and BDSM and orgy porn and transgender porn and all this stuff. I was watching these things because it was eliciting dopamine. Now, what I was watching was also psychologically fucking me up. Like, don't get me wrong, right? I've talked about this. Again, I questioned my sexual orientation based off the things I was watching because it wasn't a woman, which is actually my natural sexual orientation that I know to be true now after I've healed myself through that process. But that was a big mind fuck for me. So with that being said, dopamine is being experienced over and over again. So it's not that we're not only escaping the stress of the present moment, but we're overdoing the dopamine while we're looking at all these different tabs. Now, as you're looking at the tabs, and then you get to the point where you're going to ejaculate. Well, once you ejaculate, you orgasm, you now experience a huge load of dopamine and oxytocin that goes through your body. And that is an orgasm. That's the feeling of ecstasy, right? So now this feeling of ecstasy comes out and then it's gone. Well, once it's gone, what's left? Well, it's not that you actually go back to normal. And if anybody has watched this, has watched like Andrew Huberman, I get a lot of the scientific explanation of pornography from Andrew Huberman. I also read a lot of books on neuroplasticity. I've read like Biology of Belief, that's Epigenetics. I'll talk about Epigenetics in a second. Lots of studies. I will link down in the show notes Your Brain on Porn. Your Brain on Porn is a great compilation of the science. And I'm not going to spend too much. This is probably the only time I talk about science, because although science is really cool to know, and it helps with like your own knowing of like that distinction of what happened to you, it doesn't really help you in the healing process. Well, let me rephrase that. It does have value in the healing process. But if I tell you these things right now, you might be like, oh, that's really interesting. And now I know something. But what do you do with it? Right? So like the healing aspect of it really has more to do with the work that you do inside with your mental and the willpower and the strength and the understanding of these consciousness principles that I teach. And I know I sidebarred for a second, but I just want to at least reference Andrew Huberman in a sense of he has some great stuff on YouTube that you can check out that talks about, again, what happens scientifically. So after you're done with orgasm, well, then you start to feel guilty. Now, guilty is essentially I did a bad thing. And then you start to feel shameful. Shameful as I am a bad person, right? Those are the difference between the two. Normally you feel guilty and shameful because you've made a promise to yourself. The promise that you made to yourself is that you weren't going to watch it again, right? But then you watched it again. So you lied to yourself. Remember those 4 walls of dishonesty that I talked about in the last episode? You lied to yourself. Because you lied to yourself, you feel shameful about it. And because you feel shameful about it, you're going to hide it. And then you're going to go back into your present moment, pulling in that shame and that guilt and compounding the emotional baggage of the present moment and all that stress and that cortisol. And then you're going to feel that again. And then you're going to get triggered to not want to feel that stress and cortisol. And then you're going to want to go look for dopamine. So it's really not an addiction to pornography. Like pornography does create what I believe to be one of the most crazy emotional roller coasters of biochemicals of any of the addictions that you can have on the planet. Stress, cortisol, dopamine, right? Orgasm, and then crash. And here's the thing. When you crash, guilt, shame, you don't go back to baseline, you go below it. Right? So this happens with drugs too. Like when I was experiencing drugs with like MDMA, huge shots of dopamine and serotonin, don't go back to normal. You have no dopamine and serotonin, and then you kind of come back to normal, but then you're going to be sitting in stress and anxiety, and then you go back to the dopamine. So again, stress, go into it, orgasm, cool, guilt and shame down below. Now I'm getting back to normal, maybe, or maybe I'm using porn to bring myself back to normal. Orgasm, dopamine down. So you see it's this wave. It's this wave of emotions. This is the thing to really, quote unquote, attack when it comes to your healing. And these things are associated with the thoughts that I was talking about, right? So the thoughts that are elicited that create this emotional body response, and they go hand in hand. Emotion, body response can create thoughts to populate simultaneously. They work hand in hand in that way. But when we're talking about healing, we're not saying, hey, you can stop watching porn, which I did for 90 days. You can do that. But if you don't do the mental and emotional work while you're actually not watching porn for 90 days, which is something that I did through the process, even though I didn't see a therapist, I was working with these principles in consciousness and understanding, then you're not actually going to change your behavior. You're just going to go back to it after those 90 days. This is why addiction recovery centers have a 50 to 70% return rate. Isn't that wild to think about? 50 to 70% return rate. Now, again, the numbers that I looked for, because I always want to be transparent about this, didn't necessarily say like sex addiction recovery or drug addiction recovery or anything like that. It just said addiction recovery centers have a 50 to 70% return rate. But that's incredibly high. So that tells you that just because you go for 90 days, which by the way, most of these addiction recovery centers cost like $50,000 to $60,000, right? But to have a 50 to 70% return rate on a $50,000 to $60,000 investment is ridiculous. That's ridiculous. It doesn't work. If it worked, then we wouldn't have a return rate right like that. What I know works and how I was able to heal myself and how I help heal other guys heal is through the process of working in this mental, emotional space of understanding your triggers and how these things work on a scientific level with the consciousness principles, which we'll get to. Now, another thing that I studied was epigenetics. Epigenetics basically says that your environment influences your gene expression. Now, you could experience this in your own life. So, for instance, in my own story, when my ex-wife would leave, and I was alone, that being alone in that environment, the environment would create my genes to express a desire. The desire is sexually to watch pornography. That's how gene expression works inside of this. You also experience it like when you go to work, right? So let's go, you go to work, you have a certain amount of emotions that you feel about your work, whatever they might be. When you get into the environment, those emotions automatically come up because of the gene expression of the environment that changes it. So that's why it's so incredibly important to be around more highly conscious people. Like a lot of my healing came from my mentors. I had a spiritual mentor, I had a business mentor, but the business mentor was like a mindset mentor as well. So I was learning from them too. And again, I didn't stay through long with therapy, but I did stay with the anxiety therapist for 12 weeks and 12 sessions. And she helped a lot through the process as well. She made a lot of really great distinctions for me. These distinctions where I realized I had a choice that I could go down either two slopes and I could choose one of those slopes I want to go down. So epigenetics was really interesting. I'm sitting at this desk right now. I film content at this desk, right? So I know that when I walk into this room and when I'm not filming content, there's a computer that's right here. I do work at this desk. So it elicits a gene expression for me. This is why it's also important to get into a new environment and find new people. I said highly conscious people, but people to be around that can elicit a new environment for you. This is why in my own coaching, what I do is I bring guys into an environment with me and we create a different type of container, a safe container that's centered around integrity and truth and transparency and how to actually heal through these processes, and not only the process, but the characteristics of what I just described. And holding that container in that way, it creates a different environment than what you're used to. For me, when I would travel a lot, when I would do like the catfishing and when I would watch porn, when I was home or alone in a hotel room. I was a traveling salesman for a little bit, and that's what I did, right? So again, there was a mental, emotional, genetic connection to the environment that you find yourself in, and moving yourself into a new environment has the opportunity for your genes to express in a different way. So those are just some of the best ways that, that I can describe, some of the things that are scientific that could really help you in understanding that. And these were really, again, they were valuable for me, and they are a valuable part of the healing process. I'm just saying that they're not the source of truth. You are the source of truth. You're the creator. You're the cause, right? So that's one of the biggest things. I talked about this before with the false premises of 12 steps, which is, hi, my name's Zach, I'm a porn addict, and 2, I'm powerless against my addiction. Those aren't true. Those are not true. And they keep people stuck in the 12-step process for years, possibly decades, when really, if you really start with the premise that, no, I am something different than that. I am Zach. I am addicted to porn, right? There's a distinction there. That's not who I am, but my body is addicted. Now we're starting to create a distinction. And the distinction that we're creating there is the answer to those two questions. Who's listening and who's watching? Now I'm here to tell you that your thoughts aren't you. That might be the first time you've ever heard it, because those thoughts can be really intrusive, but they're not. You know why? Because you can listen to your thoughts and you can observe your thoughts. And if you think in imagery, which a lot of people do, you're observing your thoughts just like you can observe your reality. If you still don't believe me, here's a simple analogy. When you're outside, can you hear a bird chirping? You can. Okay. Is the bird you? Well, maybe on a deeper level it might be, but no, the bird isn't you. So you can hear your thoughts. So why are your thoughts you if you can hear them? They're a part of you. They're a piece of you. And seemingly there's this one side of you that is fearful and angry and lashes out and lies and cheats. And then there's other part of you that loves and wants to be honest and truthful and wants to serve and help other people. There's parts of you, but you are the observer of these things. You get to observe your thoughts and choose. These are the experiential truths I was talking about. You get to observe your thoughts and you get to choose what thoughts you would like. And again, I realize when we're in the middle of addiction that we feel like we don't have a choice. But that's why I'm saying that the second part of it, saying that I'm powerless against my addiction, is not true and only keeps people in longer. You have to realize, as I did, that I am so powerful that I chose to create my addiction, which means that I'm so powerful I can create something else. That's the power that you have. So when I really started to understand and get really deeper inside of myself, right? Some of the biggest fears started to express during the time that my ex-wife left. My deepest fear was being alone. And I found myself alone. That fear manifested. And we'll be able to talk about why this happens on a deeper level as we go through this. But ultimately, the fear being the cause of my reality created my reality. The fear of being alone created me being alone. That's how I created my reality. That's how you create your reality. And then the deepest pain that I experienced, and I've said this a couple of times, but again, if you're in addiction right now and you're in porn addiction, you know what I mean, is that you want so badly to be loved. You want so badly to give love. You want to experience love in the way that you know you can, but you never have before. Or maybe you did when you were really young as a kid and you've forgotten what it's like. But you can't. And you can't because of those four walls of dishonesty. You can't because you're not being transparent about who you are and what you're experiencing. You can't because you can't be transparent about your suffering and the addiction. And I'm here to tell you that your transparency is your key to freedom. Transparency is your key to freedom. There's a reason why I can sit here in front of you right now and listen to this. Because I am free. And I want to set you free. And even more so, when I say that, it's an interesting thing because the only thing I can do is provide you with some feedback, some guidance, some honesty, some coaching, if you like, in a sense of understanding that all I'm doing is creating a container for you to set yourself free. And that's what I mean when I say at the end is that you are all you need to be to set yourself free. Not your addiction, not your ego, which we'll get into, you. The real you, the one inside of you that wants to experience love at this level, the one inside of you that I know is a good man. And you might be saying to yourself that you are a bad man. You might have all this evidence in your life that shows you that you are a terrible human being. And that isn't true. If it was true, you wouldn't feel pain about it. Ever think about that? If it was true, why would you feel pain? Love is truth. You are love. You are loved. And if you want to experience yourself as love, you have to start becoming transparent about where you are in your life and what you're experiencing in the addiction. And you need to be transparent to the people that you would never want to tell. That's the hardest part about this. And to have a little bit of guidance and somebody that walks the path with you, that's what I'm here for. Whether you're here on YouTube or listening, I'm here to be a light. I escaped hell, but guess what I have? I have a map. I have a map, and my map, this is the map I'm giving you right now. I have a map and I have a light, and I'm going to walk down the path, but I can only walk unless you're going to walk with me. If not, I'm just walking alone. So I invite you to walk with me. And remember, you are all you need to be to set yourself free. If something deep inside of you resonated with today's topic, drop a question or comment below. It would be my honor to chat with you. Remember to share this video with just one person you desire to set free, because all it takes is one video, one message, one experience to awaken our collective birthright of freedom and the self-realization that we are all one.